It was supposed to be just another Monday, the kind of cold, gray Manhattan morning where people rush to stay dry, eyes low, shoulders hunched, pretending not to see the city's forgotten souls curled up in doorways. I had my schedule memorized down to the minute: boardroom meetings, lunch with investors, a press call by 3. No room for surprises. No room for emotion. But as my town car pulled up to the curb outside my building, something made me pause. A woman. She sat hunched on the granite steps of our corporate tower, soaked from head to toe, her dark coat clinging to her frame like wet paper. Her knees were pulled in tight, and on either side of her 2 little girls, curled against her like tiny birds trying to stay warm. No umbrella dot. No sign dot. No noise dot. Just silence and rain. I must have stared at them longer than I realized because Bernard, my driver, leaned back and muttered, "She's been there all morning, sir." Security already told her to move along. She didn't respond. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. I'm not proud of that. But when you live among penthouses and private elevators, you learn to tune out the desperation. You make excuses. You harden. And after years of doing business with ruthless billionaires, your instinct isn't to feel, it's to calculate. But this wasn't something I could ignore. There was no performance in her eyes. No pleading, no posturing, no theatrics. Just sorrow. Bone deep, soul-crushing sorrow. Against Bernard's protest, I stepped out of the car. The rain bit into my skin, sharp and icy. I could feel my perfectly pressed suit soaking through, the cold rushing down my collar. But I didn't stop. The closer I got, the more unreal the moment became. The woman wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking or wailing like so many do on the streets when the world forgets them. She was still, resigned. Her gaze locked on the double glass doors as if waiting for something or someone. I crouched beside her, not knowing what to say. "Ma'am, I finally managed. Do you need help?" She turned to me slowly. Her lips were pale, her cheeks hollow. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. But her voice, it was steady. "No," she whispered. "Not for me. I need someone to save my daughters." The girls didn't flinch. One was clutching a faded, half-limbless teddy bear. The other had mismatched socks and shoes at least 2 sizes too small. Their faces were blank, the kind of blank that only comes from survival. Before I could ask anything else, the woman did something that shook me to my core. She stood, unsteadily, her hands trembling as she reached for mine, not to shake them, not to plead, but to press something invisible into my chest. "Please," she said. "Take them. Adopt them. Give them a chance at something better. I won't be here much longer." For a moment, I couldn't speak. What kind of mother offers her children to a stranger in a suit? What kind of life had she lived to reach that point? But the more I looked at her, the clearer it became. This wasn't abandonment. It was sacrifice. She wasn't giving up. She was trying to save them, the only way she knew how. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I couldn't walk away. Not that day. Not from them. She must have noticed the hesitation in my eyes, the 1,000 silent calculations I was running through my head. She gently nudged the smallest girl forward. "This is Rosie," she said softly. "And that's her sister, Ava." The little one, Rosie, clutched her mother's damp coat with one hand and held the ragged teddy bear with the other. Her eyes were wide but empty, like she'd long ago stopped expecting kindness from the world. Ava, maybe 7 or 8, pulled her sister back protectively, stepping between her and me. It was such a small gesture, but so loud. It told me everything I needed to know about the life they'd lived. They didn't fear strangers. They feared hope. I helped the woman sit back down on the step. She winced as she moved. Her hand instinctively went to her side, and that's when I noticed the faint bruising along her ribs, poorly hidden under the wet fabric of her clothes. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I've dealt with powerful men who do unspeakable things behind closed doors. I've seen the silence they buy. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated. For a second, I thought she might lie, give me a fake name and disappear once I looked away. But then her shoulders slumped, and she whispered, "Lena. Just Lena. No last name. No story. No explanation." But in that moment, I didn't need more. I glanced back at the building, at the tall glass tower behind me, where people were sipping designer lattes and finalizing deals worth millions, completely unaware of the woman dying slowly on their doorstep. I turned to Bernard and said, "Cancel my morning." He didn't argue. He just blinked in surprise and nodded. I think he knew better than to push. Then I looked at Lena. "Come with me," I said. "You and the girls. We'll get you warm, dry. Food. Rest. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her daughters, then at me, her mouth parting in a quiet tremble. Why? She asked. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't suspicion. It was genuine confusion. Why would someone care? And I didn't have a perfect answer. I don't know yet, I replied honestly. But I think if I walk away, I'll never be able to sleep again. She held my gaze for a long moment. And then, without a word, she picked up Rosie in one arm, took Ava's hand in the other, and stood. It was the slowest, quietest surrender I'd ever witnessed. And it would become the beginning of everything I didn't know I was missing. I didn't take them to a hotel. I didn't call social services. I brought them to my home. A sprawling penthouse on the Upper West Side, marble floors, panoramic views, walls too clean, too cold. It was a space made for entertaining investors, not sheltering children. But as I opened the door and watched Lena and the girls step inside, something in me shifted. For the first time in years, the place felt occupied. Not by guests. By souls. Rosie clung to her mother's shoulder, her eyes darting from the chandelier to the polished staircase, as if afraid to exhale. Ava, silent and stone-faced, didn't move far from the entryway. Her fingers gripped the strap of a backpack that looked like it had been passed down through 3 hands before hers. Lena, on the other hand, looked hollow. Her body moved, but her mind was somewhere else. I showed them the guest room. I brought towels. I laid out warm clothes from the storage closet, things I'd once bought for guests who never stayed long enough to wear them. They didn't ask questions. They didn't even thank me, not out of rudeness, but out of disbelief. Gratitude, I would later learn, is a luxury of the safe. They hadn't felt safe in a long, long time. Later that evening, I stood by the door, watching through the slightly cracked doorway as Lena gently rubbed a washcloth over Rosie's arms. The child flinched at first, but didn't pull away. Ava sat nearby, knees to her chest, watching the light fade through the window blinds like she was counting the hours of safety before it all disappeared. It was then I realized, this wasn't a rescue. It was an interruption. They were waiting for the next collapse. The next betrayal. The next man who smiled with fake kindness only to show his teeth later. And I didn't blame them. I made them grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that night. Nothing fancy. But I'll never forget the way Rosie looked at the bowl, like it was treasure. She devoured it in seconds. Ava, after sniffing it suspiciously, finally ate too. Lena didn't touch hers. She just sat there, holding the spoon, staring at the steam as if it held all the answers. I'll find a place tomorrow, she said quietly. I just needed them to be okay tonight. Her voice cracked on the word tonight. I wanted to tell her she didn't need to leave. I wanted to offer something permanent, something safe, but it felt too soon, too much. So instead, I said, "You don't owe me anything." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, stood up, and took her daughters to bed. And I was left standing in my own kitchen, holding a half-eaten sandwich, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one I hadn't noticed had been vacant for far too long. The next morning, I found Lena sitting alone on the balcony. Wrapped in one of my spare blankets, her hair still damp from a shower, she stared out over the city skyline like she was trying to remember how to breathe. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but she was already awake, probably hadn't slept. I brought her coffee. She thanked me quietly. Her voice was hoarser than the day before. And then, without turning to face me, she said, "He'll come looking." Those 4 words made my stomach twist. I didn't push her to explain. I didn't need to. The bruises, the fear in her eyes, the tension in her posture, it was all enough. I'd seen it in women before, the ones who walked into my firm begging for someone to help them disappear, to hide them from men who thought they owned them. But hearing it now, on my balcony, with 2 little girls sleeping down the hall, hit different. "You're safe here," I told her. She shook her head. "No one stays safe. Not around him." Her voice trembled, but there was no self-pity in it. Just tired acceptance. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked gently. She gave a dry, humorless laugh. "I did. Twice. The first time, he convinced them I was unstable. The second time, they didn't even take the report. Said I had no evidence. Said maybe I provoked him." I sat down beside her. I didn't touch her. Didn't try to comfort her the way most people would, with platitudes or empty promises. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since I saw her on those steps. "Why me? Why were you waiting outside my building?" She turned to me then, really looked at me, and her answer was so unexpected, so painfully sincere, it stopped me cold. "Because I read about you," she said. "In a magazine. A story about how you paid your driver's son's tuition in full. How you refused to lay off employees during COVID even when profits dropped. They said you were one of the few left with a soul. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. I gambled everything on the chance that story was true. I couldn't speak for a moment. Her words cut deeper than I expected. Not because of the flattery, but because I wasn't sure I still was the man she hoped I'd be. I had money, yes. I had power. But when was the last time I'd used either to truly change a life? Then I guess, I finally said, it's time I start living up to my reputation. For the first time since we met, Lena smiled. It was a fragile, fleeting thing. But it was real. I didn't go to the office that week. Not once. Instead, I met with attorneys. With women's shelters. With trauma counselors. I had Bernard pull every legal string possible to secure protective measures. I moved money, signed emergency contracts, hired private security to make sure no one, especially him, could get close to Lena or the girls. It wasn't charity. It felt like a mission. Like I had been handed a chance to protect something truly precious, and I wasn't going to screw it up. Meanwhile, Lena began to unfurl. Not in grand ways, but in small, cautious moments. She started helping around the apartment. Washing dishes, making breakfast, folding the girls' clothes with quiet precision like muscle memory. One afternoon, I came home to the sound of laughter, real, unrestrained laughter, coming from the living room. Rosie was chasing Ava through a fortress of pillows, and Lena was sitting on the couch, hand over her mouth, trying not to cry from the sound of it. It hit me like a freight train, the simplicity of joy. Something so ordinary, yet so out of reach for them for so long. But not everything was smooth. Ava, the older one, struggled. She rarely spoke to me directly. She would tense up every time I entered the room. Not with fear, exactly, more like anticipation. As if she was waiting for the moment I'd change, drop the kind face, raise my voice, or tell her this was over. One night, I found her in the hallway, staring at the front door. She had her backpack on. "Where are you going?" I asked softly. She shrugged. "Just wanted to make sure I could still leave. In case we had to." It shattered something inside me. I knelt down beside her. "You don't have to be ready to run anymore, Ava. You're not a guest. You're not a problem. You're home." She didn't respond, but her hand slowly let go of the doorknob. And that was enough. Later that week, Lena pulled me aside. She'd been pacing all morning, clearly building up to something. "I need to ask you something," she said. I nodded. Her eyes were glassy with fear and hope all at once. "If something happens to me, I need to know they'll be okay. I want you to be their guardian." I didn't breathe for a moment. Me. A guardian. A father figure to two girls I barely knew a month ago. But I saw the desperation in her face. The trust. The silent plea. And I knew there was only one answer. Yes. It happened on a Wednesday. Late afternoon. The sky was gray and indecisive, threatening rain but never delivering. Lena had taken the girls downstairs to the community garden for some fresh air, and I was on a business call, half listening, half watching the security feed on my laptop. And then he showed up. Tall. Slouched. Cheap leather jacket and bloodshot eyes. He didn't knock. He pounded on the building's front doors, shouting Lena's name like he had a right to it. My heart dropped. I muted the call and stood up so fast the chair behind me crashed to the floor. He was here. The nightmare Lena feared had materialized. Security was already moving. My team, which I'd increased after Lena's warning, intercepted him within 90 seconds. But damage doesn't always require time, it just needs volume. And this man, he shouted every shameful thing he could in those short minutes. He screamed about her being a liar, a thief, a whore. He shouted that she'd stolen his kids, that she was hiding behind another rich bastard. His voice was the kind that stuck to your skin, greasy and loud. Rosie burst into tears. Ava froze. And Lena, she simply stood still. Rigid. Not from fear. From rage. When I reached them downstairs, Lena had placed both girls behind her, shielding them like a lioness. Her face was pale, but her spine was steel. She didn't blink when her ex was dragged away, kicking and cursing like a madman. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stared at him until he disappeared behind the building's edge, like she was making sure the monster was truly back in its cage. And then she turned to me. "I want this to end," she whispered. "I want to make it permanent." She meant custody. She meant guardianship. She meant severing him completely. I called my lawyer that night. We started the process the next morning. But it wasn't just about paperwork. It was about healing. And Lena finally allowed herself to do that. She started opening up, not just to the girls, But to me, she shared pieces of the life she'd hidden, how she used to write poems as a teenager, how she dreamed of opening a small flower shop before she got pregnant, how she used to dance in the kitchen when she was alone. I didn't tell her this, but I started keeping a notebook. Every little fact, every dream. I didn't want to forget who she was beneath the pain. That night, as I watched Rosie fall asleep with her hand wrapped around Ava's pinky and Lena curled in the armchair nearby, I realized something I hadn't dared think until then. I didn't want this to be temporary. I didn't want to be their savior. I wanted to be part of their story, permanently. It was a crisp autumn day when the judge made it official. Rosie wore a sunflower dress. Ava insisted on a navy blazer she said made her look very serious. Lena, she didn't say much that morning, just held my hand in the waiting room like it was the only anchor she had left in the world. The courtroom was nearly empty. Just us, my lawyer, and the echoes of a life that had once been broken beyond recognition. And then the words came, firm, final, and life-changing. Full legal guardianship awarded to Mr. Grant Whitmore. Immediate parental rights terminated for the biological father. Lena let out a breath I didn't know she'd been holding for years. The girls hugged each other so tight I thought they might never let go. And me? I stood still, trying to absorb the weight of it. I wasn't just a stranger who answered a desperate plea anymore. I was a father now. Back home, we celebrated with chocolate cake and a living room picnic. Rosie got frosting on her nose. Ava made a toast using apple juice and big words she'd clearly practiced in secret. Lena sat across from me, laughing, with a kind of joy I hadn't seen in her before. And then she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You didn't just save us, she whispered. You rebuilt us. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. Because I realized something in that moment. For all the wealth I'd accumulated, for all the properties, accolades, and boardroom victories, this was the only thing that ever made me feel truly rich. Months passed. Our rhythms settled into something like normal. Sunday pancake mornings. Storytime arguments over which book came next. Rosie drawing family portraits that always had the four of us, hand in hand, surrounded by hearts. Ava began calling me Dad, without thinking twice. And Lena, well, she never moved out. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because we all knew she was home. I'd once believed love came in predictable shapes. A polished romance. A neat contract. A life well planned. But this love? It came wrapped in chaos, courage, and two little girls who taught me more about strength than any boardroom ever could. It came through a woman who had been broken and bruised, but who refused to let that be the end of her story. It came with trust earned the hard way. And the best part? It stayed. Forever.